Welcome to Local News Report. I'm your host, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. To help me with this week's news is Mr. Kevin Berglund, my co-anchor. Thank you, Mr. Berglund, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I can tell it's summer. You've got a new haircut. What happened?
Well, I think it's a crew cut, ready for baseball season.
If only we covered baseball on this show. Instead, we follow what's going on in our local city of Maplewood, Minnesota. So now we have a couple of different topics we're going to cover today. The follow-up on some of our previous news reports. Now, previously we had a program where we reviewed what the city of Maplewood is currently doing with regard to their RFP, or request for proposals, for the new contract that they're going to be entering into for the organized trash collection of the residents in Maplewood. Now, keep in mind, Maplewood entered into their first contract back in 2012. That contract was a long-term contract. It was 5 years with an option, I believe, for a 2-year renewal. That's why at the end of this year that they need to enter into a new contract, and they are looking to obviously to enter into another long-term contract. We have speculated that we believe it's going to be with the big multinational company, just like it was in the past. And that the way it's been set up is that the little local trash haulers find it very hard to compete with the big multinational. Now, Mr. Berglund, remember in our last report, we had a little discussion about whether or not their spring cleanup that the city conducts, whether or not they were looking to have that in the new contract.
Thank you for the crash course on the history of the organized collection in Maplewood, where Kathy Judeman, the city council, who is the premier voice on all of this, who wants everyone, who continues to champion buy local, and she's a community organizer, turns the city and drives out all the local trash haulers and goes to the big multi-international company.
So in other words, it's really hypocritical that she says buy local, support your local business. She's against big box retailers, all of these things, and yet she's the one that's supporting the big multinational trash haulers, putting all the little guys out of business.
Right.
I see.
And of course, this whole thing about they have a pickup day, like you said, for people to clean up their garages or clean up their yards, and the city just calls up and finds a good deal where everybody goes down to the local parking lot and brings their stuff. Well, that's become too much of a burden for the city now too. They want the multi-international to take care of that responsibility.
Right. So let's take a look at our first clip. This is from the City Council meeting of June 10th, 2019, where they're getting an update on the spring cleanup and the participation.
Community Development, just in your packet, put a full memo together outlining kind of all the key stats from this year's spring cleanup. Won't go through all of that, but just to highlight some things, there were 432 visits this year, which is generally average for how many people residents we see visiting the cleanup. In total, there's about just under 29 tons of solid waste collected. And as you know, in keeping with Maplewood's sustainability initiatives, it really is an opportunity to kind of look at reuse and recycling first before it actually makes it to the landfill. So one of the new programs that the city offered this year as part of the cleanup was an organization called Us Again, and they were collecting all of the clothing items, so any textiles or clothing that were brought. They actually take all of those items and they either reuse them, they give them to communities in need, or they do recycle those as well. So that's one of the many local reuse companies that are present at that event to make sure that reuse and recycling initiatives of the city move forward.
So a pretty normal, middle-of-the-road type of report. However, I will mention that Tennis Sanitation, who has the recycling contract for the city of Maplewood and does the pickup of recycling each week at each resident and unit. They have a similar program where they have these big purple bags that you can request, and then you can fill them full of linens or clothes or whatever, and they do the same program every single week, week in and week out. And so it's not necessarily just something that's available at the spring cleanup.
And of course, this new administrator there, he talks as if he knows all about Maplewood sustainability or supposed sustainability initiatives, which of course he's only been at the city for 4 weeks. So all he does is have his talking point. And the big point of that is he talks about the reuse of clothing. Now, of course, he whips out all these things that they're going to do, but there's no statistics, there's no raw data. Now, in Maplewood, because they have so many stores, which are secondhand stores and reuse stores like the Goodwill and Value Village and all these kind of stores, most people have no problem bringing their stuff there. In fact, if they have some reused clothing, they can bring it there for free. Now, of course, although he promotes reuse, he's really only talking about recycling. And of course, everybody has that ability to recycle all their clothes or all their cloth or all their linen for part of their already bill. So why anybody would pay, because when you go down to the parking lot, that's not free, that's paid. Why anybody would bring their stuff down there and pay to recycle it when they're already paying for it in their recycling, boggles my mind. Of course, this guy, although he talks authoritatively, it's more the new guy on the job just spewing who knows what out.
Well, and generally speaking, the spring cleanup is more of a time where they're trying to encourage people to get rid of those things that they can't recycle, because they, like you mentioned, they already are recycling those things every single week through the recycling service that they already pay for.
Bingo. So what they're encouraging people to get rid of course, is old spring frames, mattresses, construction materials, wood.
Microwaves, printers, old TVs.
Right.
You got a console TV in your basement that your grandma left you? Well, that's one of those things.
But of course, you pay for that too. And
Yes.
you notice he didn't mention anything about any of those sorts of things, like the things which it's really set up to deal
Or
with.
tires. Tires is another thing.
And again, you pay extra for that.
That's
so yeah, these are the things that it's set up for, and yet he's talking as if it's just another recycling center, which people are already paying for. In Maplewood, tennis recycling.
Right.
So again, is there anything to be gained? It's more listen to what he's saying and be misled down the wrong path.
Let's continue with our next clip.
I wanted to put out there first for Tennyson, the city's recycling contractor that coordinated their portion of the event. Thanks to the mayor and council for your attendance and welcoming people, checking people in, directing them where they need to go, and greeting people with a smiling face. It goes a long way, we know. And then there was many city staff to thank. I know Public Works and the police department were involved in setup and in running the event, but also kind of the breakdown at the end. So thanks to all that. And then also thanks to Sean Finwall and Community Development for once again leading this event that's important to the community.
Let's just thank everybody for doing their job.
Yeah, because and the thing is, when he's thanking all the regular people who have high salaries, the administrators, and other people who are doing their regular jobs, so it's a break from the regular routine of the job. I mean, they, in a certain sense, they're happy to do it. But of course, there's no, again, he's whipping out all this stuff, but there's no statistics on how much it actually caused in bringing administrators in or other people in at time and a half.
Right.
Because it's on a Saturday, it's not on
Right.
a...
Or did they take comp
Right.
time away from the 9 to 5, Monday through Friday?
Right.
We don't know that. So you see, there's a lot of statistics that weren't addressed there that could be information of interest. So
Well-
let's take a look at our next clip.
The Maplewood Organics is on YouTube. I believe.
You want me to do a brief presentation on that?
Yes.
On that agreement?
Yes.
Sure. So mayor and council.
I think, well, one of the things when we're highlighting it because we want the residents to know what is happening. And from my perspective, I think if you could explain what the process is going to be. You know, we're going through an RFP for our trash collection and our recycling, and organics was kind of brought up as part of that. And if you could tell us the basics so our residents can anticipate this, where is it going to be? How are they going to be able to drop off the organics? What's the process going to be?
Sure.
That would be helpful.
So that was appointed Marley Abrams, the mayor. She was appointed mayor. And so she's, first of all, asking, well, gosh, the whole thing about organics disposal and recycling, that's on YouTube now. Tell us about that. Well, you saw the deer in the headlights look. Even the city administrator isn't aware that they have their organics recycling little promo on YouTube. So you can see how effective the communications department has been in even communicating internally about the work that they've done to try to put these promos on YouTube. I thought the deer in the headlights look was classic. Then she decided that she would switch gears because you notice she saw that deer in the headlight look also, and she realized that she asked him a question he didn't know the answer to. Oops, shouldn't have done that. You can't make friends that way. Well, anyway, so she changed it and said, oh, well then why don't you tell us what the process will be so that if people want to recycle their organics, how will they do that? It might be useful. What a great switch and turnaround that was. Mr. Berglund.
And I guess she thinks she's crazy like a fox because what you have there, and also she threw in there, because we want our residents to know. And of course, the appointed mayor there is not interested in residents knowing much of anything. And she really doesn't want them to have much time to anticipate what's going on. For example, once again, their whole new organized garbage collecting contracts. When they did that 7 years ago, they didn't have secret closed-door meetings. They had them on cable. Now, although she says, now she's mayor, she's supposed mayor, she says we want our residents to know. Yet when they're having all these meetings about what are the goals of the contract, what are the vision of the contract, they're in the back room, secret, not on camera, to the best of my knowledge, not recorded. In fact, I think you could say that that's more of the same sort of thing that Judeman pushes out, more false disinformation.
Right, and it's easy then to put out what you want people to believe if you actually didn't allow them to watch it and observe it and hear it from themselves, because they'll never know the difference. Well, let's continue.
Mayor and council, as you referenced, the city's currently issued an RFP for renewal of our contracts for organized trash and recycling services for the community. As part of that, Ramsey County is looking at kind of launching the larger infrastructure that's needed to support curbside organics recycling. So organics recycling is, the household items like food scraps, other things that can be kind of composted and reused rather than going into a landfill. Until Ramsey County gets the countywide infrastructure in place to allow for curbside organics recycling, they're partnering with a number of communities within the county to place satellite kind of drop-off sites where residents and other folks can go to that site and drop off their household organics. It's different than yard waste, so it would be anything that's collected in the home in terms of food scraps. They've identified the parking lot in the Maplewood Community Center, so just out in between the district court building and the YMCA. They would construct a very small, it'd occupy about 3 parking spaces. It'd be fenced off, and any resident could then take their household organics and drop them off in that location. And then Ramsey County would coordinate the maintenance of the site, the pickup, and making sure that the hauler gets the organics to the proper facilities in the metro area. And that is until, again, we can launch the larger curbside program as part of the RFP that's currently issued. I think the current plan is around 2022 when curbside could potentially be launched in the community. So the agreement is just for the terms between the county and the city for the operation of that.
What a great place to store all your food scraps and organic waste, right next to City Hall. We'll just keep the flies with the flies. Now, it puzzles me, Mr. Berglund. He was saying how, organics collection and the recycling of organics is going to keep food scraps out of our landfills. Where will these food scraps go? And isn't it easier to address and deal with food scraps in a landfill than all the other trash? Which is easier to decompose in a landfill? Food scraps or other trash?
And it's good you're cross-checking this, because there does seem to be problems with their logic there, because this organic waste that they're collecting, old orange peels and old meat and old banana peels, that is not going to be fed to the hogs. That's going to be what is going to happen to that? What is the process for that, since we're talking about the process? Because by the time it's picked up, because it's not obviously going to pick up twice a day or every day or maybe not even twice a week, you're going to have flies buzzing all around it. It's going to be sticking, and there's going to be maggots.
Slimy, moldy. I just know what happens to my loaf of bread. Once it starts to mold, there's no stopping that mold. Just because you decided you're going to doggone recycle it, it doesn't mean that suddenly now it is now in suspended limbo until you're processing it someplace down the road. It doesn't work that way.
And of course, in the summertime, these organic pickup sites stink. Because it's a decaying organic material.
And so, in other words, we've always thought that something stunk up at City Hall. Now we know it's really going to stink. Oh boy!
And of course, they're partnering with others. It sounds like, but again, it seems like in the final analysis, listening to him, if you cross-check what he says, it's the city partnering with the city.
Well, now that stinks too. Okay, well, we have one more clip where the queen of trash, and she's given that title to herself. We have not. She has proclaimed herself the queen of trash. She has something to say about all of this.
Actually, I have a comment. This is how the county does things. It's on the retirement plan. This was supposed to be done by May of 2017. Just a little off. Anyway, that's why they're doing it, though, is to get us in the habit of collecting organics. And for those, we already have people who are doing this, by the way, and have formed neighborhood groups, and one person a week takes everybody's compostables to the yard waste sites where they have a drop-off. You got to be dedicated to do that. So we're trying to make it easier. That's the whole point. And it is probably going to be in our new contract that when we get to that point, our hauler will be part of it. So it is an important habit to develop. And we need to point out that at the distribution site, you will be able to get compostable bags. You can't just use any old plastic bag. It has to be a compostable bag, but there'll be more details as it gets closer.
So my question is that how long does it take that compostable bag to decompose, and then all the stuff that you had in it because you forgot it in your front entryway for 2 weeks has now decided to explode all over your front entry, and now you have all your organic waste sitting there because you forgot to take the bag out?
And the other thing, you're absolutely right, even though she says that neighbors are now organizing, because she's a community organizer, right? Neighbors are organizing. She wants to imply to collect everybody's organic waste from their front door, but you said she talks about grass clippings in her, I think that's what she said.
She said, and they take them to the yard waste site.
Okay.
That's what she said. I don't know that that's where the organics go, because as the staff administrator indicated, organics are not the same as yard waste.
And
And
they-
you can't mix the two.
Well, you can't mix old meat and that sort of thing and old dairy and throw it out with the yard waste site. So again, she creeps this out as if they're doing something positively, but you cross-check what she's saying and you come away baffled. Another thing is these compostable bags. They're extremely expensive. I think a good compostable bag probably is probably $1 a piece. Now, are they going to charge people when they come to this place in the community center for the bags, or is the city going to pay for the bags? That's the thing that people would like to know, because if they're going to, and will it be required if you bring your yard waste there? What if you bring it in a regular plastic bag? Are they going to refuse it?
Well, what if I want to do it like in the old days? Because, you know, when I was younger, I had some second cousins who lived up north where they had a dairy farm and there was an outhouse and, you know, things were done the old way. And their organic waste from the kitchen all went into a slop pail with a plate over it, so you didn't have flies.
Right.
Okay, so everything went into the slop pail, and then you just hauled your slop pail out to the pile back behind the barn, and that's where you threw it. So I'm wondering if I decide that I want to use the slop pail method with the plate over the top, will they allow me to take my slop pail and bring it there and then just dump it over?
Again, she wants to put it, you're absolutely right. And I assume that's what, and listening to, that's what I assume is going to be acceptable based upon what she's saying.
Or are they going to have a city ordinance where they say that you are mandated to do organic waste recycling through their program, but that if they find out that you have been dumping your slop pail of organic waste back behind your garage, doing your own composting, that it's illegal?
Right.
Well, we'll have to keep you posted on all of these stinky questions coming out of Maplewood. Next, we're going to move on over to a new topic, which is the public shaming by the council in Maplewood of a business because they feel that they're not complying with what the council wants. We're going to turn to a new business that is along Rice Street, and they recently received a conditional use permit which gives certain conditions under which they can conduct their business. Now, typically, if a business has a conditional use permit and they are not in compliance, the city administrators just go about their regular day-to-day duties and they work with that business to bring them in compliance, and they use whatever tools they have administratively to do that. And then if those don't work, then they bring it before the council as a review of a conditional use permit and go through the process, and the person or the business that has that conditional use permit, that they are there at the time that the council is discussing their conditional use permit, so they have an opportunity to respond to whatever is being said. However, in this instance, the Maplewood City Council has decided that this will be an excellent opportunity for them to do some haranguing of business so that they can make it look like they are being very responsive to residents. And you know, the election is coming up not too far from now, and so they are using this as a platform to thump their chest about how wonderful they are and how they are policing their community. So let's take a look at our first clip.
Use permit review for Boaters Outlet separately. And the reason that I wanted to do that was because of the concerns that I have in working with the Rice Larpenter Group. We have an alliance with St. Paul and Roseville and Maplewood working together to really enhance the Rice-Larpenter area. And just at the last Rice-Larpenter meeting, there were complaints about the appearance of Boaters Outlet. And so in looking at the CUP review, there are issues there. And I guess what I wanted to do is I wanted to get an update on the issues, and specifically, the issues in the staff report talked about the boats that are parked in the front parking area, and that was actually brought up by the other two cities, by St. Paul and Roseville, and how that did not really lend to a good appearance. And also, I think that there were problems with some of the landscaping, I think. Mr. Thompson, can you give us an update on that?
So it was placed on the Maplewood consent agenda to set this on for a conditional use permit review. Not to take it off of the consent agenda so then they can go and harangue the business and to shame them in public without them even having an opportunity to respond. Because you see, representatives from the Boaters Outlet aren't there at the Maplewood City Council meeting. They probably don't even know that they are on the consent agenda to have their conditional use permit being reviewed.
So you need to cross your fingers when you're involved with this credibility gap with Maplewood city elected officials. 3 of them, of course, that are not, in my mind, legitimately there because they have not been elected, they've been appointed. She makes all these points, and we know she spews out false information. Like you said, she's saying that St. Paul, is St. Paul really concerned about what's going on in Maplewood? St. Paul is deluged with problems. Are they complaining to Maplewood?
That the shrubberies are out of place.
Right.
Right, or that there's a couple of boats parked. And now remember, this is Boaters Outlet. They sell boats. So are we concerned that they have boats parked in the front parking lot?
Well, is St. Paul?
Well, I mean, that's right, but it's not like this is, the meat market and they have a bunch of people who have lined up boats that says for sale by owner. You see what I mean? And somebody just pulled in their boat and they happen to be using the parking lot. This is a company that is selling boats.
And like she's complaining, she's stating as factual, she pretends it's factual, that this happened, all this commotion happened at some meetings. Of course, there's no video, no audio of this meeting. So again, what's true in her story, who knows? Just based upon her history, one has to question that the majority probably is lacking a lot of foundation. But again, who will actually know? Then, believe it or not, like you said, they're not there. They can't respond. They can't watch the video of this meeting. They can't address the complete disparagement of their business by the city elected officials with the administrators at Maplewood. It's just the general business climate. It just shows you in the big picture, the general business climate of what's going on with the city of Maplewood. Again, she's saying in other times, we're a big supporter of businesses, and yet they have some sort of gripe, some sort of pet peeve with one business, and they just go and they just hack on them with the business not publicly there, with the business not even knowing probably that this is occurring.
Right. So the word to the wise is that keep your shrubbery in Now let's take a look at our next clip.
So city staff has followed up with the business owner to kind of understand the delay in why the storage was occurring up front in the parking lots and the delayed installation of the landscaping. It's a result entirely of just kind of the wet spring. So the boat storage area that's approved by the council as part of the conditional use permit is for the field that's in the back of the site. They'll be screened with the landscaping, the fence, and the other site improvements. That area is not paved, it's kind of a gravel and turfed area, and because of the soggy spring, they weren't able to kind of finalize construction to allow for all those boats to be moved back there. They've recently completed that as they've started to move the boats back, and then they also have plans in the near future to complete the landscaping that was required by the council. So we expect that those items, the boat storage and the final landscaping, will complete yet this summer. It's not anticipated that would wait another year until those things are finished.
Okay, so what would be your recommendation then? I want to make sure that this gets done, because Rice Larpenter, there's a lot of effort and time and money being put into revitalizing that area, and this Boaters Outlet sits right in that area. And so I want to make sure that we don't just let this fall through the cracks. So what would be your recommendation in terms of, can we revisit this in a couple of months, or what are our options? Because this is a CUP review right now.
Sure.
So she's concerned that she wants to make sure this gets addressed, and that there's been a lot of money and effort funneled into the Rice Street revitalization project there. Well, I don't know that there's been that much money, a couple $1,000s, and her going to a few meetings and them coming up with a couple plans for how they're going to decorate the lamp poles, I guess. But you heard how the administrator gave what the rationale was, why the boats were parked in the front and why the shrubbery wasn't planted. Well, it certainly makes perfect sense. And the city is well aware that there are wetlands back behind this business, because not too long ago, Home Depot was considering this area as a possible site for a new Home Depot. And the city of Maplewood, in no uncertain terms, told Home Depot to go packing, because they didn't want them constructing next to the wetland. So you see, Maplewood knows there's wetlands there, and the fact that Marley Abrams, the appointed mayor, wants to be the hard nose about it so she can put it on her campaign platform, well, you see, this is just another good example of public shaming when there's no need for it.
And this new administrator, who's the head of the planning division there, I guess, who's been there for 4 or 5 weeks in Maplewood, he again kind of has that deer in the headlight look. Like, why? You're the mayor. You're supposed to be positive. Why are you framing it like you're framing it? I think he's just shocked. He came from Minnetonka, where they tried to do stuff orderly and reasonably, and she's going out and framing it as a hatchet job on a business. And I think he's probably thinking, what's with this woman here? Why is she so negative to businesses? And of course, you look at what she talks about Rice and Larpenter, and you drive by there, Rice and Larpenter at night. What is the thing that is most dramatic, despite all their planning, all her great leadership? You see that big tobacco shop there right on the corner that looks like it's lit up about 10 times more than it should be lit up. And my question is, that is what's the real issue there, and especially if Maplewood is so interested in being tobacco-free and in having good policies that kids aren't doing tobacco. Here they have like a Las Vegas gambling tobacco shop.
Right, it is. It is the most brightly lit building you will ever see anywhere in that whole end of town. And it's gleaming because it's all glass and it's lit up, and you can see all these glass cabinets with all this equipment for smoking.
Right.
Tobacco
Whatever you
products and hookahs and everything. And I'm wondering if on behalf of Maplewood, when she goes to her little meeting, that she's complained to that neighboring city who that building is in,
Right.
about that is not in the character of the Rice and Larpenter redevelopment area.
And that's just across the street,
Right across the street. But it is in the Rice and Larpenter development area.
where they have this big alliance. This
Right.
time we're not partners, but we're an alliance.
Right. And I'm wondering if she ever makes any complaints to St. Paul about how they should be taking efforts to move from that corner of Larpenter and Rice Street there, the lamplighter. Because you see, that may not be consistent either with all the time and money and effort that's been spent on the Rice and Larpenter redevelopment. So you see, in conjunction with what else is around there, she's worried about a couple of boats and the shrubbery that isn't in place yet. Why isn't she worried about the hookah shop and the lamplighter?
You know, both of them could be placed in other spots in those respective cities.
Right.
Not in the spot where they're using all this government, all these government funds, all this government administrative energy, all this publicity to be the central point of their whole redevelopment brilliant focus.
Right, because when they were complaining to her about the 2 boats that were parked and the shrubbery, why didn't she snip back and say, well, what about that lamplighter? When are you going to move that from the region? Well, good questions to ask. Well,
And of course, they don't have a problem with the lamplighter, but they do have a big problem with the myth.
Right. Oh, well, the myth is in Maplewood, yes, but they don't have a problem with the lamplighter in St. Paul. That's right, which is right next to the border of Maplewood. Well, let's continue with our next clip.
Yeah, it's the council's prerogative. If you want to continue the review, I think staff would recommend that the council look at it again in 1 year. That's not to say that staff won't follow up with the property owner in a shorter time period to make sure that the compliance is sooner rather than later. And that's why we scheduled the council's review out for a year. But if the council wants to see it again in a shorter time period, we'd certainly be receptive to that. Either way, city staff will be following up with the owners this summer.
Council members, what I'd like to be able to do, and I'll just throw it out there, is I'd like to be able to report back to the Alliance that we're reviewing this in 3 months, and that should be enough time for the landscaping issue to be resolved and for the back storage to be taken care of.
End of September?
I'm sorry?
And like end of September?
Okay, that's what I would propose, council members. Councilmember Juniman.
Yes, and just so you know, because as you know, our staff representative on the Alliance, it was Sean Finwall, and she's also the one that was working on this project, and she felt like she was conflicted, might I say. But she was very thorough with these people about this is an unusual use, and this corridor is going to be developing, and you need to do this, 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 and this. So while they might have had a soggy yard possibly excuse, I don't think they need any more excuses, and they knew they had to do landscaping. So the fact that it's kind of an oddball use for the now new corridor, they need to be put on their toes, that they need to stay where they were told to be from the beginning, which was do it nice and make it look nice, and you have a deadline. So I think we need to make it pretty clear, and I think that reviewing again in 3 months, maybe we'll get the message.
Oddball use for this corridor. Well, now that's really rich, because you see just a little ways down from the Boaters Outlet, if you go north, is a dairy manufacturing type of distributing plant. Well, gee, does that fit into this corridor? Now, if you go just a little bit, I believe, south of the Boaters Outlet, there's a used car dealership. Mr. Berglund, what's the difference between a motorized vehicle and a motorized boat, other than that where you use them for transportation is different?
Well, and when we listen to Juniman, again, it raises the big questions, because I think from her intonation and her way of speaking, you definitely see that what happened with the Boaters Outlet is they actually defended themselves against some of the charges or some of the questions, or they wanted to get more information on how they should proceed. And the city, whether it's the city staff or the city elected officials, you can see from Miss Kathy Juniman that, and in my mind, she's anti-business anyway, because somebody tried to defend themselves and tried to give a plan probably on what their expectations was, their goals was, and it didn't align with what had come down from the regime. What they do is they start hacking and disparaging. Like she said, we got to have this. It's not a conversation with the business. It's where we told them they would be. It's like their conversation, which they claim to always be had, is more of a big hammer from their toolbox telling businesses what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And if you defend yourself, we are going to take out our machetes and we're without even telling you, we're just going to start hatching on you. And that, of course, if anybody's watched Maplewood for a long time, you can see that Ms. Judeman has enjoyed that for years. But you can see that the mayor, the supposed mayor, the appointed mayor, Mary Abrams, also enjoys that. Her and Judeman are quite a pair, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right.
And of course, they're not good for business in Maplewood either.
No, and appointed Marley Abrams, I mean, her whole big goal is so that she can go back to this little group of people.
Alliance.
To show that she really used the big hammer on somebody in her city and how powerful she is, rather than saying, well, we're working with the business and I think we've got it under control. They had some problems with wet spring. They couldn't lay their tar down because it was too wet back there. They couldn't do the plantings because it was too wet. They would only die if they put them in too soon. Well, she can't do it in a way that is business friendly. Instead, she wants to say, yeah, we showed them. We put the big hammer down, and we told them they had to do this, that, and the other thing. Because it's what gives her the feeling of control and power. That's what the position is for her.
And I think this, if you watch these meetings enough, it kind of creeps out that probably two of the most negative elected officials in the region, but definitely in this alliance, more anti-business, more negative, more we're going to tell you what to do, has to be Judeman and the appointed mayor, Mary Abrams.
Yes.
What an embarrassment in my mind to Maplewood in the greater community, but it must be in the alliance too. Because if they're actually behaving this way, as they say, they're telling the public behaving in front of other public officials, elected officials, that must be just a big, in the eyes of the people there, they look at these as kind of creepy and a disaster.
Right. Let's continue with our next clip.
Thank you, Mayor. I definitely support the 90-day review. That seems very generous and flexible of us, if I do say so myself. But I was going to ask if it'd be all right if City Manager Coleman could, maybe for the benefit of the new kids on the council, as well as I think for me and others, we approve a lot of CUPs from this dais, and we have likely hundreds in effect across the city, and every CUP that we approve comes to us because it has the potential of being a nuisance, right? It's outside of our guidelines, it's outside of our ordinances, and we are allowing a property owner to do something outside of that, and typically are putting conditions on that to make sure to try to either mitigate or eliminate that nuisance. I think it'd be good maybe for City Manager Coleman to share, how do we review this?
Sure. That's a good
How
idea.
active are we at reviewing this?
That's a good idea.
Because they don't always come, a lot of times they come in the consent agenda. We often don't talk about them. It'd be a good idea just to know how active, particularly staff is with this.
City Manager Coleman.
Thank you, Mayor Abrams, members of the City Council. Councilmember Smith asked me how many CUPs we have, and all I can say is that it's hundreds.
Now, Councilmember Smith, he's right up there as being a bully to businesses, right up there with appointed Marley Abrams and Councilmember Kathleen Juneman. His attitude, did you hear that, where he says, well, he's in agreement with putting this on for a review of the CUP in 3 months, and that this is rather generous and flexible of them. Well, that is a really poor attitude. That's very very arrogant indeed. And to be treating your businesses that way, and particularly a new business to Maplewood that way, well, gee, Mr. Councilmember Brian Smith, I am so pleased that you are so generous and so flexible in your council duties that you can see your way to consider having that review hearing in 3 months. Wow.
And of course, this has become a creature of habit or a culture of habit that they just they go around disparaging businesses. They always praise any kind of public authority, regardless what a mess it is. But when it comes to businesses in Maplewood, they say we are proactive, positive business, but then they spend all this time in their complete proactive negativity. Right. And it's, a question of, he says, just for the benefit of new kids on the council, or new kids on the block. And what is he referring to himself? No, he's 40 years old. Okay, maybe he's more like a kid. But he's talking about the two appointed, I think approximately 70-year-olds or more than 70-year-olds. Does that add anything?
The council members, the
right.
two new council members that have been appointed.
Right.
And I would
calling them kids.
Well, they're certainly both over 60 years old, and so I don't think you would call them kids.
Right.
And it's actually sort of looking down on them too,
right.
as kids. In not giving them the credit that they've got lifelong experiences. Maybe they haven't been council members, but certainly in our review, and we'll be covering this in a future news program, in how the council deals with the myth up by the Maplewood Mall. The two council members that were the most even-handed and willing to listen to the position of the myth and to work with the owner of the myth were the two new appointed council members. The other ones were basically ready to just throw them out of Maplewood, even though it's a new owner of the myth who has no responsibility for whatever may have or was imagined to have happened there in the past.
And you can see that this whole thing up at Maplewood is more than just surface deep. They're embedded in the woodwork. Brian Smith now, Kathy Judeman, and Marley Abrams have created a culture up there that they cannot possibly even resist from just striking out with their vengeance whenever they have and often it's towards businesses. Why is there a failing mall? Why is Tim Hortons gone in Maplewood? Why are there less and less businesses in Maplewood and they choose other locations? Well, I think all you got to do is take a look at the city council and maybe you will get some little perspective of what's going on up at City Hall.
Well, and I have heard through the grapevine that there could possibly be in the future that Maplewood could lose Jo-Ann Fabrics. And if they were looking to relocate, why would they want to relocate in Maplewood if they're understanding how Maplewood is treating businesses in the Maplewood Mall area, basically that they're non-existent and they're not really important to the future plans of the North End because Maplewood has decided they're going to put housing in everywhere. So you see, Jo-Ann Fabrics, when they decide to find a new lease, they may say, we don't want that ambiguity because you've already said you want to put housing where our shopping mall is. They may just go across the way to White Bear Lake. And now we'll have a vacant building because of the ambiguity created by this council that has said, by the way they do their actions, that we are decreasing commercial usage in this city and increasing housing. Now, one thing I want to point out in that last clip too that really goes to the heart of Council Member Brian Smith's attitude about all of this is that he says that conditional use permits are potential nuisances, that he approaches any conditional use permit from the perspective that it is a nuisance, and the only reason that we put conditions on it is to mitigate the nuisance. So he has already in his mind labeled anything that has a conditional use permit as a nuisance, and that's what he was saying, and that we put conditions on it to mitigate that nuisance. That's not what a conditional use permit is. It's not somebody coming to the city council and saying, oh, I have a use that is a nuisance, and I would like you to give me permission so that I may conduct my nuisance in this neighborhood. And if you give me a couple of conditions so that I may conduct my nuisance, please do so. That's not what a conditional use permit is. That may be one factor that you consider whether or not this use will be a nuisance to the community, but it doesn't start off from that assumption that it is a nuisance.
Right, and all you have to do is watch these and see those three members, Smith, Mary Abrams, the appointed mayor, and Kathy Juniman, and you can see their crash dive into negativity. And if you need an explanation of what's going on in Maplewood, just listen to them. And of course, it's not like the city manager, the lady in the white, her big comment was, he asked me how many conditional use permits we have. At the very last, I think she didn't know the answer, but she said, I think we have a ton. Now, if everything is a nuisance in Maplewood, it seems like the only thing that isn't a nuisance in Maplewood is the palace there, City Hall. And most people, of course, believe that the Maplewood community, most of the residents in the city of Maplewood believe the community center is a nuisance. That's the one thing they would consider the nuisance. And of course, the City Hall would never label that the nuisance, which most of the residents believe it is.
And we know from our previous half of the program that once that organic composting site is established there at City Hall, that City Hall too will join the list of nuisances in Maplewood.
One side point, of course, is that we'll see if their partner there themselves gets a conditional use permit put on them to have their nuisance site.
Yeah.
Because that's a real big nuisance.
We'll keep our eyes out for that one. Now, let's take a look at our last clip.
Typically what we do is this business required a conditional use permit, and that means that they are permitted to have the use with conditions that the council finds would be helpful to mitigate any nuisances or effects that it would have on adjacent properties. So we have several of those. This was approved a year ago in May, so right before the staff report gets to be written, the staff goes out and reviews those. We do have a tickler file that brings them all up, and so we know when we have to go inspect them. I would say in reading this report that perhaps Director Thompson and I should talk a little bit more about how we're more proactive on the front end before we bring this to you, because this is a little bit conflicting when it says, mostly this is it's really conforming to our CUP, but there's still a couple things that need to get done. We should really try to get ahead of that so that when we bring it to you, it's done. And if there's a problem that we can't solve it from a staff level, then we would bring it to you and get some direction. But I think we could do a little bit better job of making sure that things that are supposed to be done at that year point are done.
Now that's City Manager Melinda Coleman. A council or two meeting ago, she just got a big fat pay raise. So now she's making over, I think, $140,000 a year. And here she is going, oh, whoops. Maybe we should have worked a little more closely with the business on the front end before we brought this to the council. Maybe we could have done a better job. Well, you know, it is a Plan B city and the one in charge of everything at City Hall, the day-to-day affairs, how the staff do their jobs, the process, putting things on the agenda for the council, everything is the city manager. And she's thinking that maybe she could have done a better job. Well, you know, she just got a big fat pay raise. Let's hope she does an excellent job. Not just a better job, I want an excellent job.
And of course, knowing how they operate up there, the culture, a little glimpse of the culture up there, one thing is for sure is that they all play tag team. In other words, she has conversations with Mary Abrams beforehand, with Kathy Juneman beforehand, and they tag team each other. They throw the hot ball back and forth. So again, because the information the council has comes from her, you know that probably all this nuisance talk, this negativity talk, this anti-business talk originates there at the center point. And another thing about, you can see that Miss Melinda Coleman isn't interested in taking off her, rolling up her sleeves, getting her fingers in the dirt and trying to solve some of these problems, because now she's coming with painted fingernails. You don't put your hands in the dirt and get down to the brass tacks, the nuts and bolts, with a brand new set of painted nails.
And I did hear her say that a conditional use permit, that there's conditions to address nuisances or impacts on the community. And that's a more accurate statement. There could be a nuisance, but it isn't that it starts out as a nuisance, as Councilmember Brian Smith has indicated.
Because with nuisance, there actually is legal meaning to that too.
Yes.
And when they're going around labeling all their conditional use permits of nuisance, that's more than just chit chat, gab talk. That's labeling people with a legal definition.
Right, yeah, that's for sure, because if your operation or your business or your action actually constitutes a real nuisance under the city ordinance, they can cite you with a citation and then send you to district court, and then you have to deal with a petty misdemeanor of a nuisance, or perhaps they might even charge it out as a misdemeanor, and then there's criminal consequences to that if you're found guilty. So this whole idea about a nuisance can have legal ramifications, and they're just using it rather loosely as a way to shame this business, and that's pure and simple what it is. Well, Mr. Berglund, I want to thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
And viewers, thank you for tuning in to this week's cable cast of our news. We'll be back next week with more news from the city of Maplewood, Minnesota. Bye-bye.
Maplewood's going to have 5 members of that committee. Roseville's going to have 5, and St. Paul is going to have 8, based on where the size of the cities as well as the funding. It's about $100,000, and St. Paul put in 50.
Right.
Roseville 40, and we put in 10, but we still get 5 members. So, as you mentioned, and St. Paul put in 50.
Right.
Roseville 40, and we put in 10, but we still get 5 members. So it's about $100,000, and St. Paul put in 50.
Right.
Roseville 40, and we put in 10, but we still get 5 members. So as you mentioned, it's about $100,000, and St. Paul put in 50.
Right.
Roseville 40, and we put in 10, but we still get 5 members.